Hey everyone, I know it's been a while since the last video. I'm deep in the middle of an album at the moment, but I wanted to get you another video with some interesting stuff, so I thought I'd do a follow-up to the 6 Cool Mixbus tips video I released in January, because everyone seemed to love that. So let's go and find 6 more Cool Mixbus tips. Now obviously I've talked about other tips in the actual main channel, but you know, these videos people seem to like. If you like them, let me know in the comments and I'll consider doing this as a regular series. I'm theming this video around the idea of managing larger sessions, looking at the audio connections manager, considering more complex setups, and ways of maximizing your CPU usage. So, number 1, direct input to output connections. Well, what do I mean by this? I mean, you can take an input from your audio interface and directly connect it to the output without the need for a channel, without the need for a track on Mixbus. Wow, that sounds interesting. Some of you are probably saying, well, I can already do that in my DSP, actually within my audio interface. Great, if you can do that and that suits your requirements, do it that way, because there is a tiny bit of latency involved when you do it through Mixbus, and obviously some CPU usage, but it's quite efficient. Why might you want to do this? Well, you might want a lower latency fold back for your singer, perhaps, or if you're stacking vocals, perhaps you might want some kind of way of easily sending the vocal that's currently being recorded at a higher level. And you can do that with Mixbus without having to mess around with multiple tracks, simply by using the audio connections manager. So let's go to the window, drop down, and audio connections. There we go. Here's the audio connections manager window. Now I have, on the sources side, I have hardware open. And I have hardware open on destinations. And as you can see, there are only 2 little green dots. What are these? Well, my microphone that I'm talking to you now with is going into my mixing desk, into input number 2 on my converters. And it goes along, and then it comes out directly out of 19 and 20, which means I don't have to have a channel strip for it to sort of mess up the look of the mixer window and confuse people. It's also lower latency, and it stays on continuously when I'm doing other things, so I don't have to kind of set it as auto input, and it's just easier to do it this way. Well, what on 19 and 20 on my interface? Well, I'm actually using an aggregate device, so I have 16 analog outputs set up at the moment, usually more, but 16 at the moment, 18 at the moment. 19 and 20 are actually digital outputs that come out of the HDMI output on my Mac, and they go to a solid state HDMI recorder, which is what I record my screen captures with. It's really easy system, and that's why I use it. But it means that I can mix in my master output, my main output of Mixbus, into the microphone signal that's coming directly through, and you can hear me and I can play back stuff on the session. So that is number 1, direct input to output connections. Number 2, stacking regions. Whoa, what are we talking about, stacking regions? Well, let's have a little look at this session here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just jump back into this little bit of backing vocal I've done and play it to you. Now you should just hear a rather dodgy, out of tune high harmony. Well, that sounds rather comical as it is, doesn't it? A bit Bee Gees, slightly out of tune Bee Gees vibe on this. This is just a demo track, I should iterate. I've just thrown some dodgy backing vocals down in a horrendous falsetto. So if we were to go onto this track and right click on this area here, we can now go to layers and view stacked. Hey, look, I've actually recorded 3 vocals over the same section, but we only hear the top vocal. If we're in grab mode, which is G, if we select all of these and right click, it says selected regions, and we just go to gain and take opaque off, which now gives us the option of the option of listening to the 3 different vocals that I have stacked up there. So why might you want to do this? Well, if you've got a lot of backing vocals that need to be panned the same, need to be roughly the same volumes, and we'll come to that in a moment, and you want to process them perhaps with some plugins, you can save on CPU usage and amount of tracks to manage, in fact, by just dropping them all into one track. You might have guitar overdubs that you want to send to the same amp sim, you might have all sorts of things, cymbal overdubs and so on, and you just don't want the hassle of an extra track in your mixer, or an extra track on an extra channel in your mixer, or an extra track on your edit view. Stick them all in the same track. Make sure you're in stacked mode, and there we go, it all plays back at the same time. But what are we going to do about this horrendous, slightly out of tune top vocal? Well, I could tune it or re-record it, which I probably would do under normal circumstances, but I'm just going to drop it down. I've pressed E to enter the this levels mode. There we go. So we can set each individual region can have its own volume. So that was number 2, stacking regions. Number 3, spill. Well, yeah, you've probably all seen the spill button. I've actually talked about this in a previous video when Mixbus 4 came out. We've got this spill button. So what's this all about? Well, it lets us spill out the tracks that go to a specific bus. So I just want to see everything that's going to reverb. I've got this piano track going to reverb. I'm going to put the backing vocal stack to some reverb as well, and simply click spill, and it just shows me the tracks that are sending to that particular bus. You could have maybe a drum bus, click spill. There's actually none on these. Here we go. Here's a bus. This input filter track that we talked about in another video is going to there. And we just click spill again, and it brings all our tracks back. Now, in a larger session where you've got all your drums going to a bus, or your bass is going to a second bus, maybe guitars on bus 3 and all your vocals on bus 4, perhaps, it's a really nice way of spilling out and seeing what is there. Also, if you are using VCAs, you'll see the spill button on the VCA channel as well. I've done another video on VCAs, so we won't talk about those today. Okay, number 4, multiple outputs. Well, multiple outputs from the master. For what purpose? Well, today we're going to consider the idea that you might have multiple monitors in your control room, but no monitor controller. Well, Mixbus has a really nice monitor control section here, this white Mon button. If you don't see that, just go to Session Properties and Monitoring, and just make sure you have that clicked Use Monitor section in this session. The monitor section allows you to do some cool stuff, dim, mono, and mute, and all sorts of controls here. But it also lets you choose where your monitor output goes to. Now, if I just click on this little box at the bottom and go routing grid, it gives me this monitor output window. And it just says monitor output left, monitor output right. And as we discussed before, I'm sending my monitors, my outputs to 1 and 2, which is where my main near field monitors are, and 19 and 20, which is my HDMI recorder. But what I could also do is output to 3 and 4. Now I've got another pair of monitors plugged into 3 and 4 just for the purpose of this video, really. I actually have a desk with alt monitor outputs. But when I play back now, I'm able to mute and unmute my different sets of monitors, the ones on outputs 1 and 2 and the ones on outputs 3 and 4. Now it's not ideal. It's not like having a speaker 1, speaker 2 button on a mixing desk or a monitor controller, or some people call this alt monitors, where you can flick between your larger and smaller monitors on the fly and listen. But it's just a useful way of having your system set up, have monitors 1 and 2 plugged into, have monitor set 1 plugged into 1 and 2, have your second monitor set plugged into 3 and 4. So that's just a cool little feature. Why might you want to use multiple monitors? Well, it just gives you a better perspective. Make sure everything works on your near fields, and then you can put it up onto your mains. Make sure it works on them. You know, different monitors reveal different problems with your mixes. Number 5, Snapshots. Okay, so if you're not using Snapshots already, you probably should be. In the session drop down here, we have Snapshot and keep working on current version, or Snapshot and switch to new version. Now, if you like to do multiple mixes, having the snapshots is kind of useful, really. It will let you work on different versions of your mix, or save different iterations of your session file as you're going along and be able to jump back to those. Now you could try saving as a different file name or something, but Snapshots keeps everything nice and contained, and as we go to the side panel in the editor view, you can see all the different snapshots here. Now also remember that if I wanted to go into the recent window here, when this Mixbus starts, you get a similar window to this. If you want to roll back to an earlier version, for instance on this Mad remix, I have all the different versions of Mad that I'd been working on, and I could roll back to an early one, and we have the time and the date of each one. So snapshots are incredibly useful. I won't load one up, but it would just load up that session as it was at that point when you saved the snapshot. If I load it up, it will disconnect my voice, so we won't do that for now. But that's snapshots. That was number 5. Now, finally, multing to a track. Okay, so again, we're looking back in audio connections, and this is kind of a variation in a way, but it's sort of something that we used to do with, old school mixing recording systems. Now, imagine you had an 8-track recorder, but you have a full band you want to record on this 8-track recorder. And we used to do that. We used to have 8-track tape. We used to have 24-track tape and use more than 8 or 24 microphones. So how did we do it? Well, we used something called the multi-track bus or groups. Now, my desk in front of me has 24 multi-track bus outputs, and these are intended to go to a 24-track mixing 24-track 2-inch tape. Each channel can be assigned to go to any of these outputs. Now that's great, because it means if I say I had 5 toms on a really elaborate drum kit, but I was recording on 24-track tape and I couldn't afford to use 5 tracks, what I could do is create a stereo mix of those toms going to, say, outputs, 5 and 6. So I would send all my toms to outputs 5 and 6, and they would go to tracks 5 and 6 on my tape. They would be printed. You couldn't split them up again, but they would be printed onto tracks 5 and 6. Now, some of you guys might enjoy working like this. Some of you might want to take a print, as well as taking individual tracks, you might want to print onto one track. For instance, maybe you're doing a podcast and you know that you always want the microphones to be the same volume as each other. Well, instead of recording individual tracks, why not record multiple inputs to the same track? Well, how would you do this? Well, simply go to Devices, Mixbus Tracks, and Hardware. So there's all my inputs and there's my tracks. Now imagine if I wanted to send inputs 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 all to the Bvox stack track. I simply draw that line across there. I'm actually going to delete that out there. So we just have inputs 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 going to that Bvox track. And that track now, if I was to record, would record all of these 5 microphone inputs. There's another reason why you might want to do this. You might be really into parallel compression and you might want to make a decision on the fly. Maybe you have a snare drum and you want to compress it, but you want to mix in some of the dry snare as well as a heavily compressed, say an 1176 compressor. Well, imagine your snare drum was coming into input, let me just delete these out. Imagine your snare drum with dry was coming into input number 4 and your super compressed version was coming into input number 5. If you were to select these on the snare drum track, of course, you'd be able to mix input number 4 and input number 5 together. Now, I will say that these just go in and mix at the volume they come into your interface in. So you have to be careful and test it in that respect. But it can be kind of a fun, interesting way to work on stuff. And of course, you know, if you wanted to send outputs from these tracks into other tracks, you could do that. If you wanted to do a sort of a bounce down, you could do that using the matrix. So that's how you mult an input to a single track. I hope you found those tips useful and interesting. They're things that you can't really do in other digital audio workstations so easily, and you know, just advanced hints and tips that you may find a use for, you may not find a use for, but hopefully you've enjoyed them. Let me know what you think in the description. I'm going to be more active in the near future on the normal channel. I know it's been very busy recently, obviously with the controller and other recording projects going on, but hopefully I'll see you soon. Happy recording, and I'll catch you next time.